I had the black pieces. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5 check. This is the Sicilian defense by me. I was aiming for my dragon Sicilian, which was my favorite opening at the time. He played bishop b5 check. I played bishop d7. He played knight c3. Bishop takes b5. I don't need to make this trade, but against young players at this time, I was so confident in the endgame because my coach Bruce Pandolfini and I studied there that I was always happy to trade down material and head that way, because I knew I could handle the subtleties of the endgame better than my opponents. Bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, knight c6. He castled. I played knight f6, attacking the e-pawn. He defended with d3, g6, fianchettoing the bishop. This is the structure of the dragon Sicilian as well. This dark square bishop is very good on the long diagonal. He played rook e1, bishop g7, queen e2. Normal development. We're headed to the endgame here. I castled. He played bishop g5. I played a6, knight c3. Now, if I was looking at this position right now as a chess player, I'd play b5, expand on the queen side. My bishop is very good in the long diagonal. But here, I again was headed for the endgame. That was my game plan in this one, and I played the move knight d4. Knight takes d4, c takes d4. Now, from one perspective, I've doubled my pawns, which is negative. That's not really such a bad problem here, because in fact, the open c-file makes his c2 pawn a weakness. If his knight moves out of the way, then I can play rook c8, queen c7, pile up on that c2 pawn. So my d4 pawn actually keeps a weakness of his pinned back. The real reason I'm not so crazy about this decision of mine is because I'm blocking off my great bishop on g7. Now, instead of being open on that long diagonal, it's biting into my pawn on d4. But okay. He played knight d5, and I played e6. Obviously, I'm completely content to trade into the endgame here. That's my plan from the beginning. Knight takes f6, bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. He played queen f3. My opponent is also suggesting trades, but for a different reason. He feels that as more pieces come off the board, things will get simpler. The stronger player will usually navigate the subtleties of endgames with a defter touch. I was happy to trade down. Queen takes f3, g takes f3, and e5. So take a look at this position. The pawn structure is very important. I have doubled d-pawns. Now, people usually think of doubled pawns as weaknesses. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. This is a case where it's not. These two pawns are very strong. The d6 pawn strengthens my e5 pawn. My d4 pawn is advanced, and it pins back his c2 pawn, which is a weakness. I want to play rook c8, rook c5, or rook c6, the other rook to c8, and double up. Now, he'll have to use his rooks to defend that c2 pawn. Now, I've got two active rooks, he's got two passive rooks. That's what I want. And the pawn structure, in fact, my doubled pawns, is what allows that kind of dynamic. So, don't be dogmatic when you're evaluating pawn structures. Don't just think doubled pawn bad, undoubled pawn good. Sometimes doubled pawns will allow you to have very interesting pressure on the other guy's game. Here, Eric recognized that my plan was to double up on the c-file, and he played c3, offering to undouble my pawns, but he's right. He has to get rid of that weakness. I traded and played rook c8. He played rook c1, defending that pawn, and now I made the decision f5. I could have also played rook c5, looking to double up, or I could have played b5, pinning his pawn down to c3, and then looking to double up on the c-file. These would have been fine. But f5 is based on the principle of two weaknesses. My idea is to trade off these pawns somehow. Now, in doing so, I might have to undouble his f3 pawn. Ultimately, if I open up the f-file, my plan is that I'll have a rook on the open c-file and a rook on the open f-file. Often when you're converting small advantages in the endgame, the principle of two weaknesses is a very important one to use. If I can play on the king side and on the queen side, going back and forth, ultimately his defenses might crumble. This is an idea to keep in mind, the principle of two weaknesses. He played d4. Eric recognized that I was starting to dominate all of the play, so he wanted to open up the center. Rook f3 is a very strong move. I'm attacking this pawn on c3, and the only really good way of defending it is rook to e3. But now if I double his pawns, like I did, rook takes e3, f takes e3, we've created a very important dynamic in the pawn structure. You see, I still have this active rook on c8, and his rook is guarding the c3 pawn. But now, down the road, if the rooks somehow come off the board, I have an outside pawn majority. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take the rooks off the board. Let's pretend that both of the kings move over to the queen side. My king comes to b5. It's looking to run up here. He defends it. Maybe he puts his king on b3 somehow. We're in a situation where we have the same amount of pawns, but his doubled e-pawns are matched up by my single e-pawn. And now I have the outside pawn majority. I can play g5, h5, whatever he does, eventually I can make a pass pawn on that side. If his king runs over to defend it, then in this situation, I can then attack the queenside pawns with my king. And his king is overloaded. He can't defend this pawn from queening and defend this pawn. He has to stop the queening pawn. I take this, and all of his pawns will fall apart. I'll make a queen on the queen side and win the game. So the pawn structure that I created is a critical one for converting the endgame. I have what's called the outside pawn majority. Learning how to distinguish these subtleties of pawn structure will be very important for your endgame play. And then later, once you know how to convert those advantages in the endgame, you can aim for them in the middle game and the opening. Make your opponent take small structural weaknesses and then move into the endgame that will help you convert that advantage most intensely. That's a big part of high-level positional chess, navigating pawn structure. So after we traded down on e3, I played the strong move rook c4. This is a typical move of rook endings. And a very important idea in rook endings is activity. My rook is active. His rook is passive, locked down to the defense of the c3 square. Now I also have the idea now of playing rook to a4, going after the a2 pawn. So my rook on c4 here has some very good mobility, and it also locks down his pawn on c3. If it was back on c8, he might be able to play the move c4. Rook c4 stops it. Later I can play b5 and lock that in, so even if he has a king on d3, he can't kick it out. Visualizing 3-4 moves in advance, it's very important in the endgame. We have to see our strategic aim and figure out how to get there. King f2, b5, king e2, and now I made an interesting decision. I played b4. You see, his pawn on c3 is pinned. It can't take on b4, because I would take his rook. Another option for me here would have been to simply play king f7 to e7, maybe even king f7 followed by g5 and h5, expand on the king side. But I made things precise. After b4, he played king d2. I'm threatening this pawn, and he has to defend it. b10. Okay, rook takes c3 would definitely have been an interesting decision, because I have the outside pawn majority. After king takes c3, if I play a move like g5, looking to advance on the king side, his king has to rush over to the king side, and then I could try to play on the queen side. This would have been a good plan for me. I decided to win a pawn instead. Tactically in this position, I have two attackers of the d4 pawn. He has one defender. But of course I can't play pawn takes pawn because you see what white plays here, right? Exactly. Rook takes c4. So what I decided to do was play the move rook to a4. Now I'm threatening the a2 pawn, which would come with check. So if he doesn't defend that pawn, for example, if he plays d takes e5, you see what I do now? Exactly. The in-between move, known in chess as a Zwischenzug. Rook takes a2 check, the in-between move. I take this to a check, and next move, I'll recapture the pawn, and I've won a pawn. He played a3, defending that pawn, and only now e takes d4. This was my calculation. When I played b4, I saw I had the tricky move, rook a4, winning a pawn. a3, e takes d4, e takes d4, rook takes d4, check. King e3. Okay, we've gone into the endgame. I messed up his pawn structure. I made an active play with my rook. Then I made a very concrete decision, playing the move b4, which forced tactically the win of a pawn. Now I have to convert the endgame. I played rook back to a4. A good square. You see, this keeps his rook pinned down to the a3 pawn. You can see a certain clarity of expression in my play here. I was a young boy, just 9 years old, but I loved the endgame. I traded into it from the very beginning, allowed trades of pieces. Boom, boom, boom. I made a couple good structural decisions which my opponent didn't quite understand. Then I won a pawn. I'm very confident here. Converting this kind of endgame win, you have to make every move precisely, correctly. You want to be confident, but you don't want to be overconfident. King f4, and now I played d5. This is a very good move, just because it's following the principles of chess. When you're up in material, you want to trade down. I'm up a pawn here. By playing d5, I'm piling up on the e4 square. Of course, you see that his pawn can't recapture because it's pinned to the king. He has to play the move rook e3, and now I can trade down into a king and pawn game whenever I want to. Here I played the move rook takes e4, which, yes, okay, it follows the principles in that it's trading down, but it violates another principle, which is that I didn't have to do this right now. I have time to improve my position a little bit. I could have played, for example, the move king f7. His rook can't move off of the defensive e4. Anywhere his king moves, I can still take on e4. And his pawn can't move because it's pinned to his king. So he's all locked down. If I can make the move king f7, improving my position just a little bit, activating the king into the middle of the board, another very important endgame principle, then next move I can take on e4. This would have been better. Improve your position, and then go where you have to go. Anytime you can make a small improvement, do it. Details matter in chess. So I got a little sloppy. I played rook takes e4. This was a mistake. We can see the power of confidence, and we can see the power of overconfidence. Being overconfident can get you sloppy, make you miss the details, and sometimes throw away a big win. He played rook takes e4, d takes e4, king takes e4. In this position, I'm still winning. It's a king and pawn endgame. I have 2 pawns on the king side. He has 1. I have a pawn on the queen side, and so does he. He has somewhat more of an active king. The key to understand is that if he runs to the queen side, I can start pushing my king side pawns. I have to activate my king. So if he stays with me on the king side, eventually my king will bring the struggle to the queen side. If he moves to the queen side, I'll move my king side pawns. Then when he returns to the king side, I'll take his pawn on the queen side. Once again, it's the principle of 2 weaknesses, a very important way of converting an advantage in chess. For some reason in this position, I played h5. A terribly sloppy moment. It gives him a whole new lease on life. And to be honest, I don't know what I was thinking here. This move violates all the principles I knew so well. It goes to show you that you can take nothing for granted in the endgame. A long, beautiful struggle can be ruined by a single slip. And often when you're closest to the win, the stakes are highest in every direction. You can never take this for granted in chess, because losing your edge is fatal. h5 compromises my pawn structure. For one thing, if he plays the move h4, his 1 pawn is locking down my 2 pawns. Obviously, I evaluated that he couldn't do that, and I was wrong. I should have played the simple move king f7, and I'd be able to win. But after h5, I want you to think about the psychology of this game. I have huge confidence, as we've seen, perhaps a little bit too much confidence, and my opponent respects me a lot as a player. I've been completely controlling this game from the very beginning. I traded down material, I took an advantage in the endgame, I won a pawn, I traded by force into this king and pawn endgame, I played the move h5. So, to be honest with you, in terms of our psychological moment, we both thought that I was winning. So when I made the move h5, he didn't recognize the chance that I'd given him. He played king f4. He can't run to the queen side, because I'll start to advance my kingside pawns. He doesn't have time. For example, if king d5, I can make the move even king f7, and then king c6. Now I can always start to advance. g5, king b6, g4, king takes a6, h4, king b5, g3. I'm going to make a queen before his king can get back, or before he can make a queen with his pawn. This is winning for me. He played king f4, king f7, king g5. You see, by playing h5, I've given him this hole in my pawn structure, which lets him lock down my progress. King g7, we both had calculated this far. He plays king f4. King f6, h4. This was the critical position. When I played the move h5 here, I evaluated this position would be winning for me. I thought after g5 check, h takes g5, king g6. He's in this position that's called zugzwang. Anywhere he moves his king, I can take the g5 pawn. If he stalls for a minute by playing a4, then I play a5. Once again, zugzwang. If his king moves this way, I take the pawn, and then he can't stop my h-pawn. If he plays king e4, I play king g4. I'm shouldering his king away. King e3, what should black play here? Keep on shouldering the white king away. King g3, shoulder the king away. King e2, what again? Yes, king g2, shoulder the king away. And next, the pawn just runs up the board. White can't stop it. My opponent here played a4, a5, and he actually played king e5. A terrible decision, which, to be honest with you, came about because of my confidence. I had so much confidence at the board that he trusted me. King g3 I knew was completely winning for me, and he knew that I was right. But the truth is that we were both wrong. Let's take a look at why. If king g3, king takes g5, black should play the move king h3. And now the idea is that I thought, and he thought, he trusted me, that I could run over to the queenside, take that pawn, while he'd have to deal with my kingside pawn. I would take his queenside pawn, run up my king up to b2, and just escort my pawn up the board. No problem. That looks winning, right? We'll take some time and calculate it out. Do you think I'm right? This is one of those moments where you have to know the position. It's very important to have an understanding of certain essential endgame positions. Let's take a look. If I play king f5, king h4, king e4, king takes h5, king d4, this position looks completely winning for black, because I'm much closer to the queenside than he is. The key is, though, that if he understands if he gets to the c1 square with his king in time, he can draw. Then he can know he can save the game. King g4, king c4, king f3, king b3, king e2, king takes a4, king d2, king b3, and now, in this position, if it were my move with black, I could play king b2. The white king would be shouldered away, and I can win the game. But here white has the very strong move king c1. This is an endgame. There are hidden resources everywhere. You see his point? But one thing you have to know that in king and pawn endgames with a rook pawn, if the defending king can reach the corner, it is a draw. Always. In other words, if we get to this position, then white can draw, because if it's my move here, if I play a2, it's stalemate. So if you go back to this position, his king wants to get to the a1 square. That's what we call a theoretical draw, meaning it's part of chess theory. People know that position's a draw. So I have to stop it by playing king a2. I cannot let his king get to the corner. You see how white can draw this game now? He plays the move king c2, trapping my king on the a file. If I play king a1, then of course he can just play king b3 and take the pawn. So he has to move his pawn up the board. If he plays king a3, what does white play? Exactly, king b1, you head for the corner, and you draw. After a4, now what should white play? King c1, piece of cake, no problem. Now, if black plays king b3, then you get to the corner. We know that's a draw. If black plays king a1, you just go back to c2, no problem. So black plays a3, king c2. The point is that the white king can move back and forth, king c1, king c2, king c1, king c2. If white plays king a1, then king c1, king a2, king c2, king a1, king c1. It's a draw. The second that black plays a2, white just plays king c2, and what is this? Stalemate. Actually, black is up material and is stalemated. The black king can't move anywhere. There's no pawn moves. It's a draw. So in fact, an extension of the theoretical draw of the white king getting to the corner is that if the white king gets to the c1 square, it's also a draw. I didn't know that. My opponent didn't know that. Neither one of us found it in the game. And so if you go back to this position, he played king e5. King g3 could have forced a draw. After king e5, I simply played king takes g5, and it's all over. He played king d5. Remember, if he plays king e4, I just shoulder him away. King d5, what should I play here? Exactly, h4. King c5, h3, king b5, h2. King takes a5. I make a queen, and I win the game. No problem. In this particular position, if he plays king b6, I just bring my queen to the corner, and then I bring my king into the game.